This is Studio 809.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone. You can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to all my social media, my newspaper columns, my other podcasts, my photography website. You can sign up for my newsletter and email me if you have any suggestions or comments for guests or topics to cover on the podcast. Today, we're going to talk more about the 2025 Give Pikes Peak campaign, which we're running a series of podcasts that all come out today with different groups that are involved in the great outdoors part of Give Pikes Peak. There's a lot of groups. It's probably the biggest section. I picked 4 that cover a couple different areas, but check all of them out at givepikespeak.org. Today I'm talking to Terry Peisner, who is with the Friends of Monument Valley Park. Terry, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Terry, you were last on the podcast a couple of years ago. You guys, I like to call it, you're a financial friends group. You provide a lot of monetary support to the city. And your most recent project that you were involved in was the rehabilitation, I guess, of Duck Lake in Monument Valley Park. Tell us a little bit about your role in that.
Right. So we contributed $125,000 toward the restoration of Duck Lake. And actually, all of that was raised in past Give campaigns. So the Give campaigns have been a huge component in our ability to fundraise and to give money to the Parks Department for important projects. We have really concentrated on the restoration of historic stonework. But in the Duck Lake project, it was a little different because we gave $100,000 for them to build the stone wall that circles the lake. And that was actually new construction. It mimics what is at Shadow Lake, which is just to the south. But then we also gave $25,000 for them to repair a historic wall to the east of the lake. And it's kind of a levee wall, or I like to call it an embankment wall. It had a lot of areas with missing stones. And it used to actually be totally covered with vegetation. We didn't even know it was there until the project began. So now it's totally exposed, and $25,000 went toward that. And our mason, who has done all our historic masonry work, actually worked on both the project. He repaired the historic wall, as well as building the new stone perimeter for the lake.
For those who aren't familiar, Monument Valley Park runs along Monument Creek, which basically runs right along the west side of downtown.
Right.
And it is one of, if I remember correctly, one of General Palmer's original amenities to the city. And it's part of the Legacy Loop Trail, which people are aware of, that goes around downtown and stuff like that. So there is a lot, if you walk along Monument Valley, through Monument Valley Park on either side of the creek, there is a lot of that old arch stonework and benches and steps that lead up to the neighborhoods, especially on the east side. Really cool spot, and I love seeing that old stonework. Yeah. And you guys are working on restoring a lot of that.
Right, exactly. We actually started our work back in 2011, and we worked with a historic preservation architect and a structural engineer, and they did an assessment of the whole park and identified over 40 different historic stone features. And so you're right, the park runs for 2 miles, basically from Bijou Street downtown to the north up to Monroe Street. And yeah, the park is filled with wonderful stonework. The park dates back to 1907, as you mentioned. General Palmer gave it, and we like to say he gave it to the people of Colorado Springs rather than just the city of Colorado Springs. So some of the stonework goes back to that date, 1907. And what's really wonderful is the geologic column, which was built for the opening of the park. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a neat area, kind of where Fontanero Street dead ends into the park. And it really represents the geologic layers of the Pikes Peak region. So that was one of the primary stonework features. And then a lot of stonework was added in the late 1930s and 1940s by the WPA because there was a flood in 1935 that destroyed a lot of the park. So they came in and they built like the Columbia Street entrance. They actually redid the retaining walls of the creek as well. And they also did a beautiful serpentina curving retaining wall in the northern half of the park. And they also built those levee walls to on the east side of both Shadow Lake and Duck Lake.
I know the column you're talking about because typically when I walk my dog in the park, we park right there on Fontenero Street, right at the end of Fontenero Street where it dead ends there, and then go down in there. So we go by that column all the time. One of the other projects, you mention that, was Shadow Lake. And that's a little further south from where Duck Lake is. It's by the ball field and the pickleball courts a little further south,
right,
almost to Bijou Street.
Like just beyond the bathhouse, just beyond the swimming pool and the bathhouse. Yeah. So the Parks Department restored that lake in 2023. I don't know if you remember, but I don't know if it was 10 years before that lake drained. They couldn't retain the water in there. I think there had been a liner in there, but it was leaking. So for a long, long time, it was just a dry lake bed. And, people were very upset about that and really wanted it restored. So the city did get the money primarily, I think, from Tabor retention funds. But also at that time, we got a huge grant from Lyda Hill Philanthropies. We got a $400,000 grant, which she gave directly to the city, but it was earmarked for our work and for our stonework repair. And so like I mentioned, on the east side, there's a very kind of interesting retaining wall. It's a tiered retaining wall with a couple of steps. And that was in very, very bad shape. So most of her grant went to the repair of that wall.
And if you go by there now, I remember hiking by there for years, and it was just this big empty pit. And not only did that project that you guys helped fund with the grant and the funds you've raised here put water back in there, but again, all that stonework and all that work around it was done. Right. It's a beautiful lake. It's not too long ago I walked by there with my dog, and it's a beautiful little pond.
It is.
In there.
They did a great job. I mean, they, restored it like it was. I mean, that's always the hope with historic preservation, that it looks like it did when it was first built. And so, they put the island back in, and they kind of have rocks around the island. The other thing that our money went toward was the stonework, again, around the perimeter of that lake. And that was historic. They, they rebuilt it like it had looked before, I guess, because they had to take everything out because they had to put a new liner in, and then they put a concrete footer around the lake to attach the liner to it. But over that concrete footer is where our mason placed all the historic stones. So you can't see the footer at all.
It is a beautiful site. It's very nice to see that. Again, it used to be just this big pit in the ground over there, and now it's a nice, beautiful pond. Duck Lake, which had already been there. Duck Lake had been, it wasn't empty, but it needed some restoration work and stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't empty, but it wasn't full. I mean, it was always kind of a mucky mess. And, it drained, it would drain, but there is groundwater there. So actually, when the Parks Department restored that lake, they did not put a liner in because they felt there was enough groundwater. And I think at least a quarter of it is filled with groundwater now. And so, but they learned a lesson from Shadow Lake because they put non-potable water in Shadow Lake. And even though they had an aeration system, they had an algae problem. An algae problem was created by that non-potable water. So in Duck Lake, they have potable water, and they're hoping to avoid that algae problem.
Cool. I saw one of the things they added there was somebody was referring to it as the duck ramp for the ducks and geese to get to. Yes. And I guess that was like an unintentional amenity, but somebody said, hey, that's for the ducks to get in there.
Right. Because, it's interesting because actually Linda Hodges is a woman who does bird walks for our group. And so she was unhappy, actually, that there was no access from the ground into the water for the birds. And so it turned out that Jake Butterfield, who's the construction manager for the parks, they had this extra stone left over. So they basically built a little ramp. I mean, both for maintenance purposes, but it's also worked out wonderfully for the ducks and the geese because now they can walk in and out of that pond. And it makes a difference. It was funny because I was down there one day and I saw like a group of geese using it. And I was like, oh my gosh, they really are using this little ramp to access and get out of the pond. So that worked out well to give them
I
a
would have
little
never thought of that. I would have never thought of that. I would have thought the ducks would just fly in there or jump in the water and fly back out. But I guess they actually rely more on walking in and out of these things.
Right. And I think, like Jake was telling me, I mean, the adult geese can. I mean, I think, well, you were there for the ribbon cutting, like right before the ribbon cutting on October 30th. A whole flock of geese flew in and landed in the lake, which was a totally cool sight to see. So I think adult geese can, but I think the babies can't necessarily get out as easily. So that ramp is helpful for them.
And that makes sense. I've seen them at Nancy Lewis Park where the babies are there and they're kind of I have a great picture of one standing on the edge, kind of looking down, like deciding whether he wants to risk jumping in there or not, or maybe.
Yeah, it's a big jump for a little gooseling.
Yeah, and maybe he's thinking ahead, like, how do I get back out? Kind of a thing.
Right, exactly.
Beautiful work you guys are doing there. The stonework there, I just love seeing that old stonework. You have a new project that's part of your Give campaign funding, your campaign. Tell us what this new project is you're working on.
So the next project we want to do is the restoration of the baseball stadium, which is also in the southern half of the park. It was built in 1917, and so the back of it has some beautiful stonework, and the stonework itself is in pretty good shape, but the bleacher area was concrete. And then at one time, I think the Parks Department actually covered the concrete with like plaster or stucco plaster. And so now it's just a mess. I mean, there are cracks through the plaster because what the plaster did, I think it retained the moisture, which is not good for concrete. And so the concrete is broken up, it's cracked. There's actually sections where you can see the rebar coming through. So this project will be a little different for us because it will be, paying for the, repair of these concrete bleachers or having them rebuilt in sections. So, and this will probably be a couple $100,000 to repair this. So we definitely plan on applying for a state historical fund grant to do this. And the first step will actually be to apply for a $15,000 planning grant with the State Historical Fund. And why we need that planning grant is because we really don't know the total condition because you can't see, underneath the bleachers. They're all closed off. And in the back with the stonework, you can tell there are two sections where at some point, I think the Parks Department did fill in these vents with newer stones. So when we get this planning grant, I mean, what we'll do is we'll take out those stones that were not original and then have the engineer come look. He can look with a video scope. He can look in physically and just see, what's going on underneath those steps and what the situation with the metal infrastructure is. But this one may require, replacing a lot of that original concrete.
Cool. And I've been by that ballpark. Anybody who's walked through there, you go by the ballpark. It's by the pickleball courts, and it's by the pool, and it's by Shadow Lake, all that stuff, kind of in a row along the west side of Monument Creek there. Tell us a little bit about how long the Friends of Monument Valley Park has been around, and did you start with the original? You kind of touched on this, but did you start with the original intent of your job was going to be to restore all that stonework, or did you have some other thing that you wanted to do when you started out? How did that work out?
Well, the group started in 2000, so we're actually celebrating our 25th anniversary this year.
Perfect.
And I think, so it's great. And I think when they first started, I joined more like 2010, 2011, so I've been in a long time. But I think when they first started, it was really, they weren't focused on the stonework restoration. I mean, preservation was a part of their mission statement, but kind of what they got going in those first 10 years was, they did Lilac Day, kind of celebrating General Palmer. They started the musical Monday concerts during that time. They started various nature walks. So they kind of focused on, educational and I guess entertainment opportunities to kind of bring people into the park and enjoy it. And so when I joined in 2010, yeah, we were looking for new projects, and Judith Rice Jones, who was on our board at that time and really a local historian, knows a lot about the history of the city and the parks. I mean, she suggested, repairing the stonework, because what had really happened was, the city just did not have the money to maintain this stonework. And then especially like in 2009, their funding was cut way back. And I think even to this day hasn't even reached the pre-2009 levels. So they just didn't have the money, and the stonework was deteriorating. And some of it was even posing a threat to the public safety. On the Columbia Street entrance, some of those walls were leaning so much that they really were in danger of collapse. The engineer, who assessed everything, liked to say they were leaning more than the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So, it definitely needed help. So that's, at that point, we really started focusing on it. And I remember thinking, when our consultants did the assessment and said it would take at least $1 million, to repair all this, I thought, how will our little volunteer group ever do that? Well, here we are like 14 years later, and we have done over $1 million worth of repairs. And of course, there's more to do because those were 2011 numbers. So that's kind of, how we got involved in it and what the focus of the group has been all along.
Moving forward, do you have any other projects going down after the ballpark? Do you see other projects? Is there always some repair work or something that needs to be done there?
Yeah, I think the ball field is going to be our last major project. There are smaller stone features in the park. There are like tree wells along the path that could be repaired, but they really aren't in that bad a shape. So we haven't really figured out the next major project, but I think you touched on it. Maintenance is going to be an issue, and we're definitely going to need, money to go back and repair the walls, because we did repair the stonework at the Willamette Street entrance, and that's actually very, very nicely done stonework. That was done by crafted masons like in the 19-teens or early 1920s, and it has an upper level and a lower level. Well, we had that all repaired, and at that upper street level, a car backed into it this past year. So, it knocked over kind of the end of the pillar, and, so obviously, we need to have our mason come back and do that. So, I'm not sure how much that'll be, several $1,000s to repair that. So there's always something happening. And even at the Columbia Street entrance, some cracks are appearing because the design that the WPA did really wasn't the proper design to withstand the force against the walls from the dirt and everything. They arch downhill, and they should be arching uphill to hold back the soil. So I think maintenance issues are always going to arise. And so that's what we need to make sure we still have funds for.
On the other hand, they've lasted almost 100 years, so they did do a few things right.
They didn't do too. You're right. That's funny. They didn't do too bad. Bad. It's our structural engineer giving me engineering lessons on why they're having problems.
And we learn things as we go along. I'm reminded of, we talked about the Fontenero Street and coming in there and that geologic column that you have there. But I also like right in that park there, those nice curvy walls in the park that I'm sure are just there to be decorative, but they're beautiful. Just these right by the ball field over there, and there's a bench and these beautiful curvy walls that I'm reminded that we used to just do things because they looked nice. And I think that's what those are. I don't think they do anything other than they really just look nice, and they break up this big expanse there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you're talking about the Serpentine Wall, which is near the softball field and the fence, and that's exactly right. I was told by our consultants that it's not necessary to retain the wall. It really was just done to look beautiful, and it is such a lovely sight seeing that curving along the path. And that's nice to see. And, one other thing I was going to mention, because you were talking about the Fontenero Street entrance, is that geologic column, which is right there, used to have a waterfall, a man-made waterfall beside it. And there are a series of ditches. Boddington Soccer Field was a reservoir. And so it was fed by by the El Paso Canal. And so the water came down, it flowed down beside that geologic wall, and then it actually flowed on out. There was a lake there. There used to be 4 lakes in the park when it was built in 1907. So there was a lake right across from the geologic column, and then it went out to Monument Creek. So it would be nice to still have all those lakes, but even back then they couldn't maintain it. I'd originally thought that lake there was destroyed in the 35 flood, but I was reading in the nomination that put the park on the National Register of Historic Places that it just dried up. So even back in the 1930s, they were having a problem with the lakes.
I would love to see that waterfall return next to the geologic column. I think that'd be awesome.
So many people say that. I don't know where we're going to get the water. It take a lot of money. We have to pay for the water.
I'd always wondered about Boddington Field because I always wondered why it was in a hole there, but it makes sense, obviously, that it was a reservoir. And,
right.
It's like, why is this a deep hole in the ground here?
It's unusual that way.
It makes perfect sense. I've never seen water in there, so obviously that area is dried up too, other than after a rainstorm you see some. But other than that, it stays pretty dry. So I imagine the same thing if the groundwater has just receded to the point that it's just not in there anymore.
Right,
but,
and so it was actually fed by the El Paso Canal. So I don't know.
That's right.
Yeah. So I don't know the source of that water, but it must have been the rivers or the creeks or something.
Yeah, probably diverted it off the creek and ran it through there or something like that.
Yeah, it must have.
Way cool. Well, I love the work you guys are doing. I spent some time at the Friends group over in North Cheyenne Canyon and the magnificent stone bridges that they have in there. And they redid those bridges some years ago. And one of the things they did was they restored them with they're not exact duplicates of the old stone bridges, but they used the old stone when they rebuilt the bridges to at least put a facade on them, and they look wonderful. I always love that kind of work, and I love the work you guys are doing to just restore. I love walking through there, and those little alcoves that are in the park there where you kind of sit there, or you go up the steps and access to the streets. And my dog loves getting up there, and he loves hopping up on big rocks and stuff. So he's always posing for a picture up there.
I really love the history of the park, and I really have enjoyed the historic preservation work we've done. It's been great. I really like the focus of our group.
It's awesome. Well, Terry, do you have anything else you want to tell us about the Friends group and your campaign for this year before we go?
Yeah, it would just be, yes, we're raising money for our next project to restore that baseball stadium. And I think one thing I didn't mention is the funds that we raise in the Give campaign. What we really can do with those is use those as matching funds when we apply for a state historical fund grant. Because, if we apply for a $200,000 grant, we have to put forth 25% of that at least. And so that's where, the Give campaign funds have been super, super helpful to us in our fundraising and in our restoration. And then we're also having our Give celebration party next week at the Public House, and it's going to be on Wednesday night, November 19th from 5 to 7 p.m. And we're also going to be celebrating our 25th anniversary at that party. So that should be a lot of fun. We always have a lot of giveaways from local businesses and organizations. So it's always a very fun time. So you're welcome to come, Bob. You should come.
I think I'll be in town, so I think I'm going to come out there.
All right.
Tell everybody where they can find the Friends of Monument Valley Park. You have a website that they can find you at?
Yes, it's fmvp.net, and we're on Facebook and Instagram. You can just, search for the Friends of Monument Valley Park and find those sites.
And for the Give campaign, it's givepikespeak.org. Check that out. Go to the Great Outdoors section. A lot of groups there, but if you really like history and if you walk through Monument Valley Park and you appreciate that stonework there, then definitely give to the Friends of Monument Valley Park because they're restoring that work and those ponds. And I love that whole history. I love being there, and it's like a living history kind of thing. You're walking through it and you're experiencing it like it was done 100+ years ago, which I really like. Well, Terry, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Best of luck with the Give campaign, and folks, give to Friends of Monument Valley Park. Check out their website, look at their social media, see what they're doing out there. It's a lot of really great work.
Okay, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, Terry, and thank you for being on here. And thanks, everyone, for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. We will talk to you next time.